Good morning, everyone. My name is Krzysztof Bulski, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you to today's EU Bubble Insider webinar titled European Parliament Elections 2024. We will discuss strategies, insights, and key lessons from the campaign trail. And thank you for joining us. We have an exciting session ahead with valuable insights and a discussion on the recent election campaigns. But before we begin, just a few housekeeping notes. This webinar is recorded, so you will be able to replay it later. And if you have any questions during the session, please type them into the comment section, either on LinkedIn or on YouTube, and we will try to address as many as we can during the Q&A segment of our webinar. Now, I have the pleasure to introduce our distinguished panelists who bring a wealth of knowledge and insightful observations to our discussion. And let me start with introducing our panel. So to my right, we have Stanisław Pietrzak, Director of Public Affairs at CEC Group. Also with us is Jerry Zagoritis, founder and chief strategist of Campaign Lab. We have Matteo Albania, director of communication at Mast & Partners. We have Daniela Vancic, European program manager at Democracy International. And last but certainly not least, Adam Nyman, the co-founder and director at Debating Europe. Now, I hope I got all the names right. This is always a challenging thing in our European community. Now, to start, I would like to give each our panelists the chance to share a brief opening statement, to share their initial thoughts on the key topics that we will be discussing today. And maybe let's begin with Jerry. Jerry, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Krzysztof. Good morning to everybody. Haven't prepared an opening statement actually, but I just wanted to say that ultimately this was proven to be a good election where certain fears of journalists and of people watching have thankfully not come true. The center held, the European People's Party increased its forces, the socialists managed to keep the forces, and ultimately the centrist coalition of the EPP, the SD and Renew has managed to be almost as strong as before. Of course, a center of gravity to the right with the slight increase of the ECR and the increase of the ID, albeit a huge fragmentation to the right of the EPP, the RDD, and of course the AfD in the non-inscrit now, and of course with a big defeat by the Greens, who, however, might be playing a crucial role in future negotiations, and a decrease in the seats of Renew, who, however, will still be in for one of the top positions, as it seems. So I think all in all, it's like in in Lampedusa's The Leopard, the way everything had to change for everything to remain the same.
You're muted, Krzysztof.
Oh, I'm very sorry. I touched the wrong button again. And I just wanted to say that it was a very interesting opening statement and an opening thought, and that I'm curious to hear what Adam would like to say in his opening thoughts.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. I think it was a fascinating campaign, and I kind of echo what has just been said, meaning that jury is still out on whether social media can actually swing an election. There's a lot of talk that everyone, that specifically young people, would be influenced by social media, and that their votes would be dictated by it, that would be flooded with deep fakes, the use of AI would completely skew the results. I'm not sure from what I initially have seen that has been the case. Definitely, social media networks are part of a larger information ecosystem, but there hasn't been a positive performance, and social media does not automatically correlate to higher voting and winning. We can see that in Hungary and Belgium, where both Fidesz and Vlaams Belang were by far the biggest spenders, but didn't perform as well as they thought they would, or everyone expected them to be. So it's still a mixed bag. There's still a lot to unpick, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from the other panelists on what they think. But it's a mixed bag, and one that I think is going to the debate is only going to increase in terms of what the impact has been. Yeah, good to hear what the rest of the people have to say.
Well, we will definitely discuss the impact of social media on the campaign and the role it had in this particular campaign, but not only, because obviously there are other channels that played a crucial role. Now I would like to give the role to Daniela. Please share your opening statement with us.
Yeah, hi everyone. Good morning. I agree with a lot of what the previous speakers just said. I think we went through a bit of an up and down emotional journey on election night. I think we all expected and we knew that the far right would make gains. So I think that doesn't surprise any of us. But I remember the reactions in the room at the start of the night when the first results were coming in, and that the far right AfD in Germany was in second place, that the far right in Austria was ahead. And I think that the reality was then really sinking in, and there was a first initial shock still in the room. Like, we had been caught off guard, especially then when President Macron dissolved the French parliament and called for snap elections. So we started the night on a low note, at least at the watch party I was attending. But then over the course of the next hours and finally the next day and where we are today, we see then that the pro-European groups in fact did hold their majority. So now there is this sense of relief, like, okay, we maybe have an uphill battle ahead of us, but it's not the doom and gloom that maybe some polls and projections have told us that we would experience. So I think that's where we are now. Maybe the French snap elections in a few weeks will change how we see this too. I think it's just interesting to see what national issues, or in some cases also regional issues, dominated in the different EU countries. Here in Germany, for example, is interesting because for the first time ever, 16-year-olds were also able to vote. And also, guess who they voted for? First-time voters and young voters was actually the Christian Democrats, the Conservatives, and the AfD, the far right, who were tied for first place for those young voters, 16-year-olds. So that's why, I mean, I think a lesson, at least in Germany, is also we can't just lower the voting age and think it's going to solve all our problems, and that, you know, young people, they are not like a monolith. They're not necessarily also all pro-Europeans. There's a lot of civic education that's still required. And maybe in 2019, young voters were green voters, but guess what? People changed their mind. So I agree. I think there's still a lot more to unpack what happened at national level, and Germany's a really interesting case. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to the discussion.
That's a very good point, and I think the audience, the young audience, was also quite an interesting one to analyze in the Polish elections. So I would like to give the floor now to Stanisław from CEC Group.
Hello, everyone. Good morning from Warsaw. I was mainly covering Poland, but also Central Eastern Europe. Here, ahead of the campaign, I think the main question was what will be the size and the role of Russian and Belarusian disinformation, whether they would be physical attacks or acts of hybrid warfare. And these did happen. There were acts of sabotage in this campaign that played into the campaign. There were attacks on Polish soldiers instigated at the Belarusian border. There were attacks of hacking, but they weren't at the scale that maybe some experts predicted them to be. There wasn't a massive wave. There were 4 or 5 major incidents, which I can touch on later, but this showed us in Central Eastern Europe and in Poland especially that it is not only the role of social media disinformation, that these actions don't originate and end in the web, but that this disinformation was really classic movements across the border, sabotage, physical effects that then were translated to social media. In terms of the wider election, it's quite a special election in Poland. The first time in 10 years, the civic platform of Donald Tusk won the election. Tusk immediately compared this to results across Europe, across Germany, France, and Austria, and portrayed himself as the liberal, pro-democratic, pro-freedom beacon of hope, so to say. These are his words, not mine, but he was clearly alluding to results across Europe. He said that his party, the Civic Platform, is currently the best result for liberal parties across Europe. And one of the interesting things is also in line with European trends, the debut of the alt-right confederation, the anti-Ukrainian, misinformation spreading radical right party that has entered the European Parliament for the first time with 6 seats and the third score in Poland. I think this will be quite interesting for any topics concerning misinformation campaigning and trends. So I think that's my opening thoughts.
Matteo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks to all the other panelists. It was very interesting to listen to your insights. I'm going to bring a bit of a different perspective. I would like to go back to one data which I think is quite important, which is the turnout, that contrary to what was hoped and perhaps expected, didn't increase much. We have a turnout of these European elections of around 51%. In 2019 was a bit over 50%. And this is despite some countries have lowered the age to be allowed to vote, and despite the spread of social networks and the activity of the European Parliament and of many political parties to get people out to vote. So and if we look at the data in some countries, in some big countries, I'm thinking about Italy, Spain, Portugal, Poland itself, less than half of the people went to vote. So there is definitely, while we have seen, of course, people mobilized by the far right, there is still definitely a problem to comprehend what Europe does and to understand why we elect members of the parliament and what they do for the constituencies back home. So there is still this distance that and this void that still people struggle to understand. And that's where I think that gap needs to be filled and needs to be improved ahead, because in the Eurobarometer survey that was shared a few months ago predicted an increase of turnout of around 10%. This was not the case. Several issues were at stake in different countries. And another conversation that I think is slipping a bit in the debates that I'm listening these days is the fact that yes, it is true the center held its power share. The far right way was not that big, but it still was quite prominent. It still led Macron in France to call for snap elections. In Germany, the AfD got 15%. In Italy, Meloni's party and ID combined, Lega, together, they were over 30%. What we are lacking, I think, in the conversation is understanding why people do vote for these parties, and what in big numbers, especially in these big countries. And it cannot just be, I think it cannot just be minimized out to propaganda or to Russian interference. There is to be, I think, a broader conversation on why people, especially the European elections, but also in national elections, we have seen that why people do go vote for this party. Is it not? I don't think it is just a protest vote. I don't think it is just because they are influenced by their propaganda, but there is a discontent. There is a lack of connection with moderate and centrist parties, which I think it will be a mistake not to address by the APP, by ALDE, by the Socialists and the Greens, that they also lost a lot of seats. It will be a missed opportunity not to address the root causes of the far right consensus, which didn't explode, didn't go that well as it was forecasted, but it still was a significant result in many countries. So those are my reflections and my views that I would like to bring on the table.
Thank you very much, Matteo. And I thank everyone for the opening statements. This only shows that we have a very exciting debate ahead of us today, because we are witnessing a very interesting and dynamic environment of this campaigning business, because I would like to remind everyone that this is webinar to discuss the professional aspect of campaigning, and what lessons can we learn from those elections that can be used to better campaigns in the future, with better voter turnout and more successful ways to address the voters. And I would like to start this discussion today with, first of all, reminding our audience that we are waiting for your comments and questions on LinkedIn or on YouTube. Feel free to ask them as we move forward with the discussion. And my first question to all the speakers, but particularly I would like to start with Matteo, is if you see some changes that could show some maybe innovative campaign strategies, or just something that is different and was different in this campaign compared to previous European campaigns. Matteo.
Well, as Adam just mentioned in his introduction, we have all seen how the spending in advertisement was mostly done by far-right parties. By the mainstream parties, there was, I think, in several countries, the idea that pondering on national issues and making more and more national elections was crucial. And from a European perspective, I think it was even more crucial that European political parties need to liaise with their own national members to better understand what national issues were at stake, what national concerns were at stake. We're still far away from having a European public opinion. We still have national audiences. And I think more and more European political parties have used communication platforms and communication tools, for example, WhatsApp channels, WhatsApp communities, to link to those level of conversation. So not to address voters in a very generic way and widespread way, but to link with those party members, those activists. They better know the situation on the ground. So compared to 2019, and even more compared to 2014, social media have been used to activate rather than target, to comprehend the issues that they were at stake. This is what I've seen, to mobilize not directly voters, but to mobilize those influencers, those activists, those people that they were on the ground and they were campaigning for member parties. On the other end, of course, the far right has used polarization, has used the tones that we all know, we have seen. And I mean, I talk about I can talk about my country, but I've seen also this happening in other countries like in Italy, in Germany. European figures, European leaders have been used as a culprit to be at the opposition, to be used as a contraposition with national leaders. So Europe is been often identified as the one to blame. And this technique has worked as in national contest works to blame migrants, was to blame other external actors to gain more consensus by the far right. So Europe has become a target, and European leaders that have been more and more recognizable. I mean, I'm thinking, of course, about von der Leyen. It was in the past the case for Juncker as well. Have became really targets to the narrative and to increase the narrative and the idea of contraposition by the far right. But from the pro-European parties, I've seen really the use of social media done in a more effective way, by understanding that addressing the voters was, yes, okay, was something that you could do on the social media platform, running a get out to vote campaign, running an awareness campaign, but taking advantage of more community-related tools was also crucial to better understand what the issues stakes were in the different member countries.
Jerry, you've been, of course, focused on the Greek scene, but we know that your experience covers far more than just that. So I'm really looking forward to hear your thoughts on what was so special about this year's campaign, and what new maybe tactics or strategies have you witnessed or experienced?
I wouldn't claim that this election campaign, any of the 27 election campaigns that took place, plus the pan-European one, which is more of a show rather than an actual, direct election anyway, was very much different than what we've seen before. I mean, the media may have changed a little bit, but ultimately, I don't see lots of differences. Of course, it was the first time there was a Spitzenkandidat that was actually an incumbent president, and as Matteo said, that changes a lot in terms of recognition. I will agree with Matteo very much that community building was a big thing when it came to campaigning this year, both at the national level as well as at the European level. A good example is the von der Leyen campaign, which actually very well utilized WhatsApp communities to connect with people high up in the party, but also party activists in the different member states, and kind of managed to align the messaging to the extent possible. We saw a lot of use of TikTok from candidates, as well as from parties in several countries. We saw quite extensive Google advertising, quite extensive Meta advertising, so mainly Facebook and Instagram, but also quite a lot of, in several cases, outstream video, display, outbrain, so essentially, programmatic advertising and publishers network utilization. So money was spent, funds were invested. Now, when it comes to the messaging, of course, you have two cases. You have the case of the pan-European campaign, which obviously each of the parties stuck to their messaging. Others more than others. I think that the EPP did have quite a clear message. I mean, von der Leyen did have quite a clear message when talking about prosperity, security, democracy. I think that is a message that actually picks on all three, on the two issues that are pertinent to European voters, one way or the other, prosperity, and because obviously two things here. One, and we can discuss about it later, one of the main issues I think next Monday, the next 5 years, will be Europe's competitiveness, and that is very well linked to prosperity. But also, I think one of the key factors driving this election when it comes to the voters and the way people went to the booths was inflation and of living. So there goes prosperity. Security, of course, there is the war, there is migration, there is also, the sense of sort of personal safety or economic safety and all. And of course, democracy is, countering the threat from the far right or from the far left. Now, when it comes to the national campaigns, obviously, like every other campaign in all previous years, in 2019 and 2014, things were mainly national. In Greece, I think, well, I suppose inflation and cost of living was here as well the number one issue for voters. There were other issues as well. There were values-based issues. There was agriculture. There was public health that was discussed, and of course there was a very, very heated debate between the two main leaders, which, well, in my opinion, also kind of helped to increase abstention. Abstention was very high. Abstention was very high. It was slightly above or around 60%. So only 40% went to the booths. That can be partially explained by the fact that there was a double election, national election last summer. There were local regional elections this autumn. So essentially, this was the fifth time people were asked to go to the voting booth. Fifth time in less than a year. So Greece was below the EU average this year, and that's very strange because usually it's way above the EU average. I think those are main remarks I would like to.
Thank you very much, Jerry. And it's interesting that you pointed out this marathon of elections that took place in Greece, because a similar situation happened in Poland actually. And I was, being Polish myself, I of course followed this in detail. And first of all, I wanted to ask Stanisław about his opinion, how this influenced the turnout and the entire election, the entire campaign process. Also, concerning the fact that many of the faces people saw in the campaigns repeated in the previous campaigns. So, yeah, Stanisław, please share your thoughts on this.
This is exactly what I wanted to touch upon. Thank you, Krzysztof. So Poland had this election marathon in October 2023. We had a parliamentary election which had the record high turnout in Poland, 75%. We never even got close to 75%. Then we had a local election this April with far lower turnout, 45, and now we had 40% turnout, which is not bad for Poland, but still a huge drop. And this was anticipated by the political parties. Everybody knew there would be election fatigue, there wouldn't be as much money. Some budgets differed tenfold to what was spent during the parliamentary election. Spending in Poland was far lower on Meta and Google advertisements than Hungary, Romania, even 4 times lower in certain time periods. So what politicians did is really focus on polarizing, focus not on policy message, but mobilizing their base. And this somewhat happened. This put smaller parties at a disadvantage, smaller moderate parties, and allowed the radical confederation to soar, this polarizing narrative. As you say, it was important in this election that the same faces appeared again. So in the European election, the ruling coalition put out 22 ministers and deputy ministers to run for the European Parliament. And how this made people feel is a little bit cheated. That was the main message of the campaign for the opposition parties. 7 months ago, they got into power, they got their ministerial seats, their deputy ministerial seats, and suddenly they want to leave for Brussels. And the way they explained it wasn't really convincing to electorate. I think the message that got through is they want to run away, to a better paying job, to a calmer job, that they did the dirty work of replacing the former government for 6 months, and now for some of these high-level politicians it is time to rest. And this didn't work out for a lot of the ministers, deputy ministers running in the election. Out of the 20 deputy ministers who ran, only 3 got in. So now 17 deputy ministers have to go back to work after losing the election. And this brings me to my second practical point about how this campaign differed. Usually in Poland, and probably historically in the EU, it is the pole position candidate which wins without much effort. And this, for the first time, changed in Polish history. 8 out of 53 MEPs were surprises. They were candidates who jumped from much lower position and overtook the first position. And usually we get 2 or 3 surprises. This year it was 8. This showed the party leaders that if you put in the effort in the campaign, which was mainly physical, you go out and you meet all your constituents across quite large regions in Poland, that you can, jump over the candidates, the MEPs that were there for 20, 15 years. And this is also what happened, which I think will change future campaigns, European campaigns in Poland, as it was pretty much a certainty for some of these political veterans to gain their seat, and many of them are now without a job and don't really know what to do. So quite exciting in terms of practical takeaways.
So one thing that hasn't changed in Poland is that whenever there is a candidate running for the European Parliament who is still in office, the one way to attack him is that they actually want to change their hard-working political job for a job that will not require to do anything. And I think this is one of the big misconceptions about the role of the European political bodies in Europe, that is also used probably not only in Poland. I'm curious to hear what Daniela will say about how the German campaign was maybe different from the previous ones, but also referring to what Jerry said before, that the pan-European campaign is just a show. Daniela, would you say that the pan-European campaign was important for and how important it was for the German process?
Yeah, I think so. The European Parliament's, at least multimedia approach itself, I think was quite different this time around. This time there was much more of a focus and reflection of the past. We were really using like the past to instill this like historical responsibility for us to get out and vote. We all know the video about the grandparents, the message to the grandkids. So it's a lot more focused on like this historical self-reflection. This is vastly different, I think, from the 2019 EP campaign, where the campaign was titled, of course, This Time I'm Voting, focused a lot more on first-time voters, and had a much more of a view towards the future. You remember the video then that was produced, I think it was called "This Time or Today I'm Being Born," the journey about the live births across Europe, and then the message of what kind of Europe are they going to live in. So if you have the possibility, the opportunity, choose the future. So I think that's interesting that we had a little bit this like self-reflection of the past this time around. At least this was the EP's approach, and last time it was a lot more like future focused. Now, as far as in Germany, I think that the strategies changed quite a bit, especially for some parties. The German Greens, I have to say, surprised me a bit. Well, first of all, they had a party policy also not to sign any pledges, like any campaign pledges, like civil society pledges. This was not the case also five years ago. But what I really noticed was the German Greens also really tried to rebrand themselves, because for the first time, you really started to hear them over the last few weeks that they had like a pro-business message almost. And even the billboard just in front of my neighborhood here in Cologne, Germany, said something like a strong Europe means a safe Europe, something like that, like something related to safety, security. So these seem to be like some of the main messages coming from the German Greens. So it looked like they were really trying to rebrand themselves over the last few weeks. And lastly, one of my observations I also want to bring in, because we haven't talked about it yet, at least as what innovative campaign strategies have been used, or even actually not used. I think AI was not really as effectively used as it could have been. There were reports I just saw this morning that AI chatbots were actually spreading election-related disinformation. ChatGPT, for example, was giving out false information about how to register to vote if you live abroad, about how to send a ballot by mail, for example. Gemini just straight out refused to answer any questions about the electoral process. And one of these reports said that actually Gemini had the worst performance for providing electoral related information. So I think, we can talk about also what some strategies were that were employed that worked well. I think with AI, we can see that there's still so much more potential. We can do it a lot better. And I think it's a shame we haven't really exhausted it to its potential.
We will definitely touch upon the AI and also the disinformation angle of the campaign. But before we do, I would like to give the voice to Adam and also maybe extend the question here to the reflection on how well Europe did this year in engaging voters. And maybe there was something that worked better. Only half of the people that could vote decided to actually pass their vote in this election. So it's not something to be proud of, but maybe Adam, you have some different observations.
Again, I think the jury is still out on the effectiveness of campaigns to draw people towards the elections. I thought the election campaign from the European institutions, the Parliament, was quite a negative campaign. I mean, it was harping to the past. There's a clear fear that the far right were going to be, be knocking at the doors. A lot of fear that disinformation was going to be rampant, that AI was going to be rampant, and as said, it wasn't necessarily the case, thank goodness. That's not to say that it won't be the case. One thing that I would really like to, there are two things actually I really want to see, and at some point someone I'm sure is going to do a study on it. One is the effectiveness of the campaigns, but also the effectiveness of media literacy campaigns that ran before the elections. To see, I was really curious to see how many people, how effective these disinformation campaigns were, in view of the fact that quite a lot of effort has been put in, or an increasing amount of effort has been put into media literacy campaigns, both in schools and across society as a whole. That is one thing that I think is really going to be interesting. We, as at Debating Europe, do big focus groups. And we ran a big focus group across 7 countries with 2,000 people. We've published at the beginning of this year. And one of the key elements that came out of specifically the young people, sort of age between 18 and 35, and I'm using young as sort of as a generic block, although they're not, was that they were very fearful of disinformation. There was a very big plea to try and have a higher degree of civic education. And they welcome the efforts that have already been put in there. So I'm quite curious to see how effective that has been overall, and what efforts should be put in, again, from the lessons that we've learned from that campaign to increase that. Because it's a lot of, I hear a lot of talk, not necessarily in this particular panel, that social media and TikTok and algorithms and disinformation and AI are going to kill democracy. They're not. They are part of a far bigger conversation that needs to be had about a social contract that is broken in Europe, why that is broken, what needs to be fixed, how do you bring in, as Daniela said, civic education across the board, It's a multi-generational push. This isn't something that just snuck up on us and can be easily fixed. It is something that will need to be worked on for generations to rebuild that trust with specifically young people, but also the elderly. And communication is going to be key, not just around campaigns. It's going to have to be a continuous process, year in, year out, with age-appropriate, generation-appropriate language, content, platforms. And I think that's something that I'm really looking forward to seeing, whether the lessons will be learned or whether now that the campaign's over, everyone will go back to their usual modus operandi and forget it until 4.5 years before the next election.
That's a very interesting point. Well, indeed, we are in a reality that social media and disinformation and AI will stay with us, whether we like it or not. I also feel that the amount of fears regarding the influence of disinformation, of fake news, of deep fakes was going to be much bigger on this campaign. Maybe I would like to ask this as a challenging question. Maybe some of you would not agree with me, but I don't think that the influence of those new technological advancements that posed a danger to the public debate was as big as everyone feared. So I would like to put this question out and see who would like to go first.
I can have a comment regarding what I mentioned in the beginning. Absolutely, we didn't see any instances in Poland of deep fakes, of AI. It was very much techniques which we've seen throughout the years. The loudest one was perhaps a classic malware phishing scam, where the Polish press agency was hacked and a message was sent out across all media that Polish soldiers are mobilizing to move into Ukraine. That was a week before the election. And that's very much, a link sent to your email inbox that you click. The Polish special services reacted very quickly to that, cut out all the information. But I think for the actors that are trying to influence the Polish election, so as we've mentioned before, Russia and Belarus, these are very much tactics that are not new. There aren't. These are very much checked and confirmed methods of action, which could be amplified rather than completely innovative methods.
Daniela, you wanted to have the...
Yeah, I was just going to say that there was, I think, at least in Germany, there was a lot of worry about the role of TikTok. And maybe there is a little bit of reason to worry because while we're a little bit late to the game, the far right is good at this. They're really good at this. They're much more authentic and less curated. And I think that the pro-European message was a little bit diluted, and just it wasn't as effective as the far right's message. If there's actually one thing you should see on TikTok is videos of Jordan Bardella from France, because it's just authentic and cool in some way, and where you can really see why then it goes viral and why he has the following and support that he does. I mean, if you didn't know anything about Bardella before watching videos of him on TikTok, you'd be like, yeah, that's somebody I want to know more about. So they're really effective at this. We honestly have got to be a step ahead. We have to think about the next big thing, what it's going to be. I think we had a lot more expectation about Threads, the Instagram, Twitter, but it's not really picking up. At least it definitely hasn't full out replaced Twitter. And we have to think about what's the next big social media or messaging platform in Europe. And I think it was Jerry who mentioned it, WhatsApp channels. I think now WhatsApp channels are really starting to take off, and you subscribe to a channel, you get info about what you subscribe to. It's like an even more accessible and visible newsletter because you open WhatsApp 50 times a day. So I think we've got to be a step ahead. TikTok, I think the space has been taken quite a bit, but we need to really work on our messaging. It has been already said in this group, and they're good at it. The far right is really good at it, and that's the bad thing. It's too bad they're not on our side, because they have some good approaches and techniques.
Jerry, would you like to add something?
Yes, actually, one thing and a couple of comments probably. First of all, I agree with everybody. I don't think that deep fakes were actually an issue this time. I think that this information was more this time again about good old fake news and good old disinformation attacking political opponents. Whether it was coming from the Kremlin or whether it was actually coming from simple negative campaigning. I can refer to a couple of cases. In Greece, there was this rumor floating around about a potential attack by the Kremlin to the EU and to Greece, and I think that was the case in other countries as well. There was another rumor floating for some time that China would attack NATO or would attack the EU if NATO were to attack Russia. So clearly Kremlin-backed rumors there. But then it was just the good old disinformation or negative campaigning. I can refer to this instance in Spain where the Spitzenkandidat of the PP, Dolores Montserrat, was accused of certain statements regarding pensioners that were untruthful. Same possibly happened in Greece in several instances. So I don't think anything had really changed compared to the past or compared to previous national elections there. Second point is that I agree with Daniela again that TikTok is pretty much taken. And I also don't think that in this election, other than France and Bardella, who is a case study himself, played a very big role there. Also, given that abstention in the age that are very TikTok friendly was also higher, right? In Greece, well, the paradox in Greece is that TikTok is actually dominated by the prime minister, so by the center right. And it was that was the case ahead of the national elections last year, where the center right for the first time actually won the youth vote for the first time in history. This time it was more balanced because the left, so the main opposition, has a new leader, more communication friendly, more TikTok friendly leader, and so that was balanced. But again, it was balanced between major parties, not so much the alt-right or the far right or the radical right, however you want to classify different parties. And thirdly, and I'm interested in everybody's comments here, because when it comes to the get out the vote video of the parliament, I mean, personally, I was not very convinced, but I also don't think that European institutions videos can actually play a huge or make a huge role or make a huge difference when it comes to voters turnout in the different elections. But well, actually, when I first watched it, everybody was saying on LinkedIn, Twitter, everywhere, it's so innovative, it's so great, whatever. But what it actually reminded me of is 5 years ago in the States, there was this video by I think Rhode Island, so Providence-based agency for the Knock the Vote campaign, which was called "Dear Young People, Don't Vote." And so, probably different framing. The message was the same. So I don't actually see it as that innovative in any case. And I would just like to ask for everybody's opinion on that as we progress the discussion. Thank you.
Matteo, would you like to share your thoughts here?
Yes, and actually, well, I appreciate all this round of talks because they were really interesting insight. But I do agree with what you say, Chris, at the beginning. I did not see such an impact on AI, of AI in these elections, which, as Adam said before, doesn't mean that they will not be in the future. So the spread of fake news using AI and most mostly using AI for the wrong in the wrong ways and to spread disinformation can still happen despite all the efforts that both European institutions and the platforms themselves might do in the next months. I want to take the chance also because I saw that there was a question based on my I think initial statements on the chat by Charles, and he's asking how why voters would vote more, as a protest would vote more to the right rather than choosing a moderate option. Having a caveat here, each vote to each far right party in different countries has some differences. So I will not make an analysis saying that who vote for Meloni in Italy has the same reason that those who vote FD in Germany and Marine Le Pen and Rassemblement National in France. But there are some common traits, and one of them is that of course these parties had never governed. So the protest is also meaning that you want to see how you want to protest against those moderate options that you already know, that you already tried, that they don't satisfy you anymore, and then you want to give a slap in the face to those people and say, well, I'm going to vote I'm going to go for the real extreme. On the other hand, they show new faces. Even if we think about the last elections, even Rassemblement National in France had put forward Bardella, as it was mentioned by Daniela, as a new face. So even Marine Le Pen had to do a step back and allow a new face to come in to appeal to young voters. And if I look back at Italy, that there is another reason, is the fact that Meloni used another tactic, which was the one of being more moderate. Since she has been taking government, she has definitely softened her stances on different policies. So there are several reasons why they do not choose moderate options. One of them is also because the far right parties, they sort when in the cases, in some cases, of course not in Poland, but in some cases when they get hold of power, they themselves become less far and they become more modern because they have a sort of reality check. But there is a disaffection towards what has been already tried, towards big coalitions, towards the classical parties, and there is the idea thing from the middle class, which is not existing anymore, because also the society has been polarized between elite and lower classes, to send a message somehow. I think in that way, which is the reason why I said at the beginning that it is true that in this European election, the four main European political parties held their grounds, but still I would not underestimate, I would not go business as usual as these elections were all okay. I would still, if I were the main political parties, I would still hold a reflection on why in France Marine Le Pen parties got over 30%, or why FD got more than the socialists in Germany, and so forth in the other countries.
There's one observation I would like to also share about the really impressive effort of several organizations from within the Brussels bubble, industry organizations, NGOs that were trying to convince people to go and vote. So it was not only the campaign by the institution, but also many lobbying organizations also campaigned for better voter engagement. And an observation that I would like to share firstly is that one organization I work with was approaching influencers, just asking them to share with their audiences the enthusiasm about going to vote, nothing political, no branding. And the response from various influencers from various countries was rather negative. No, we don't do politics. We don't engage in that kind of campaigns. And my question to you, and I would like to start with Adam here, because I also know that you have to run in a moment, Adam, is how how important are campaigns like this, and how to do them well, because you have experience in how to make the public feel engaged and have a positive approach towards politics. Just one more thought here. I was recently in a panel debate where a lobbyist from Brussels in Poland was telling a young academic audience about his job. And he started by explaining himself, that he calls himself a lobbyist, because in Poland, being a lobbyist is something that you have to, sort of hide if you don't want to be perceived as someone doing something shady. I think there is a lot of work to be done to demystify the impact that people's positive engagement could have on politics. Well, I asked, I think, more than one question in this contribution already. So, Adam, I would like to give the floor to you.
Thanks. I mean, I think it's a very interesting question. I mean, we're talking about effectiveness of campaigns that are very much, especially the sort of the institutions campaign, which is very in a beltway EU bubble targeted. I mean, if you talk to, and I hate using this term, but it's, you know, real people, genuine people who are on the periphery of any conversation we're having here. Most of this is alien and it's a joke. It's their reality is completely different. They are, you know, it's they don't care about these videos. They don't care about the communication, but they're not even affected by it. They crave authenticity. So having influencers who turn down offers to be part of a campaign, it speaks to that authenticity. The fact that political institutions, corporate affairs organizations, lobbying firms are trying to bring on board people to make their message more authentic is one of the oldest tricks in the book. It's just the medium has changed, the platform has changed, but people are seeing through it and have different set of expectations. So they want conversations, they want reality, they want their daily lives to change, and I think they can smell a rat a mile off. So the blah blah has to stop. Again, from what our focus groups has been saying, the findings with, again, young people is that they want a different kind of politics. They want a different kind of engagement. It's not based around party politics. It's not based around elections. It's based around a continuous engagement and involvement at different levels and trying to rebuild, essentially, trust. And that is one of the biggest problems that we will, as a society, will need to tackle at multi-levels, not just at EU level, but at national level, at local level, at regional level. How do you rebuild trust in institutions, in the politicians, in government as a whole? And this is really a byproduct of the COVID crisis, climate change, the economic crisis, the war in Ukraine, compounded by the disinformation and the information overload that you get on social media. But it's very much a multi-layered issue that really does need to be addressed over multiple generations. And we sort of need to break out from this kind of conversation, as fascinating as they can be, and they are fascinating, but it's 6 practitioners talking to more practitioners. We're not representative of society as a whole. So it'd be really interesting, again, to take some time to digest the effectiveness of this campaign, why they worked at different levels. They are very effective in some countries and not effective in others. They were effective with specific groups of people, but not others. Why? What resonated? But if I can just take one final plea, let's not be overly enamored by digital. It's part of a communication campaign and a communication strategy, but I would not underestimate the power of the human, face-to-face, emotional, be that with a politician pressing the flesh, or just groups of people that are close to you, friends, acquaintances, because that is going to be one of the most powerful narratives and influences, influencing groups, peer pressure, peer influence that will make a difference in how people perceive elections and politics, and I mean politics in the broadest possible terms going forward. On that note, I am going to have to go. Apologies, but I hope the conversation continues in the most positive way, and it's been really fascinating, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Adam. I know that Jerry is waiting to share his comments, but I think Stanisław had
very quick,
right to what Adam just said.
A very quick comment about, because we're talking about turnout as if that's something everybody wants. But for some political parties, and I know for a fact that in Poland, it was not in the interest of the EPP party, the Civic Coalition, for there to be a large turnout overall, because the political calculus worked in a way that if they only motivated their voter base by very polarizing attendance campaigns, that would turn out better for them. If they motivated the moderate, smaller parties, they would lose their share of the vote. So, we're talking here as if it's obvious and well known that we have to motivate voter turnout. But for some of these leading parties and politicians, it's sometimes it doesn't calculate for them to have. They calculate if it's over 50%, then we could have a chance to lose. So they dial down the money, or they communicate only to their voter base. So just a quick comment about turnout.
And now I would like to give the voice to Jerry.
Thank you, Chris. Well, I would like to tap a little bit into what Matteo said and also what Adam said, and I will agree with both of them. The thing with the populist far right gaining votes is that they don't gain votes because their ideology is appealing. I refuse to believe that. They gain votes because they actually tap into the everyday issues that voters are concerned with and the voters talk about. And what do voters ultimately want? Voters ultimately want to do well by their families, do well by themselves, do well by their communities, right? And so in the cases where mainstream parties realize that, and even at the last minute changed their campaign narratives, and the center right did that in several cases, and the center left did that in several cases, they managed to control the damage. And I think to an extent, this is why we have a better result or an okay result as we speak now. And coming to Adam's thoughts about digital campaigning and good old traditional, get out the vote, good old traditional door knocking, and essentially, physical campaigning structures, party structures, and all. I could not agree more. Digital is a tool, but is not an election winner when it comes to such cases, and especially when it comes to bringing people back, to explaining to people why they should not be disenchanted. And you can see this if you compare two different cases, the two big countries, right? You have France and you have Germany. And what happened in France? In France, you have people disenchanted with the government of Emmanuel Macron, and where they go to the far right. They go to Marine Le Pen. Why? Because the mainstream parties, the good old center right and the good old center left, okay, now that's recovering. The parties that had roots in local communities have been destroyed. They are very small, and so there is no opposition, rooted in the population. On the contrary, in Germany, you will see that, and I'm sure that Daniela knows the data there better than I do, but I have an image of what happened. I mean, people left the SPD. Okay, we've been seeing that for months, but where did they go? And of course, they left the Greens to an extent, but where did they go? Well, I'd say, if I remember well, about 2.5, a bit more than 2 million voters, SPD voters, didn't go to vote at all. But then more than 1 million, almost 1.5 million voters voted for the CDU, for the center right. And then about 1 million voters, 1 million and a bit, were split between the AfD and BSW. And so the reason why the AfD is lower where they were expected to be, although higher than where they used to be in the past, is that one, there was another populist party to the left, and two, the center-right traditional party with structures down in society held. I think that illustrates very well the importance of having traditional parties that are rooted in society, but also the importance of talking about the real issues, owning the problems. If you tell a citizen that there is no inflation or that the cost of living is low, you're going to be a joke. I mean, they're not going to listen to anything else you're saying. So you have to admit to the problems before you lean in and you offer the solution. And the parties that did that, they did well.
Daniela, would you like to comment?
Yeah, just on some of the points already made. First of all, just another point from my side that I agree. The best way to get out the vote, it's been proven over and over again, is genuine face-to-face conversations. It's just conversations amongst peers. And all of this, like what we also do with flyers, leaflets, social media, all of this, I think, is good. We shouldn't stop it, but it should just be considered like secondary, like just considered a reminder to vote. We need to have these genuine conversations, because the converted, they're going to make plans to vote anyway. Sometimes they just need a little reminder or nudge, but really we need to speak to the persuadables. I've led some campaigns in the U.S. Democratic Party. Of course, it's a very different ball game, but we have stats. Really, it's door knocking, canvassing, even phone banking, having a phone conversation. Is just what works best, and you need to reach them several times, actually, not even just once. And then a leaflet they get or an ad they get on social media is just considered a reminder and really just secondary. On what Jerry said, yeah, it's totally true. The question is, where did the SPD voters go? The ones that just a couple years ago brought the Social Democrats to their best results, that they are now leading the government, that they came in third. And actually, it wasn't just them, but the entire traffic light coalition did very bad, right? So it's true. The SPD voters were actually, where did they go? They actually didn't go vote. And so that's, for me, I think one of the biggest lessons of the night is, I think what we as pro-Europeans should do. It's interesting what Stanislav said about the strategies of different parties. But I think as pro-Europeans, I think what we should do going forward in our upcoming, now we have national elections, regional, or the next EU elections, is focus on what is the biggest electoral block. And in almost every single country this time around, the biggest voting block, it's not the far right, it's not the conservatives or socialists, it's the non-voters. We know the EU average alone is still at 50% non-voters. It's virtually the same as five years ago. So we have limited time, we have limited resources. It's just easier to convince someone to simply go to vote with the right messages than it is to convince someone far right to switch teams. So I think we have just a lot more potential if we want to have this switch back. We need to chip away at the far right's gains. We need to also look at those non-voters. That's the biggest block of the electorate, and that's much easier to do with our limited resources than it is to ask then those that vote far right to completely switch teams. That doesn't mean we should lose our messaging. I think we need to still talk about jobs, prosperity. These are the things people worry about. They can't worry about social issues if they are worrying about putting food on the table. So that also still needs to happen. But I think we need to also just focus on that biggest electoral block, that's the non-voters.
I would like to go back to the question that I asked to Adam and give it to Matteo again. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on the role of the EU bubble, our professional world in this process. Are we doing a good job in telling people and telling the real people about how things work here in Brussels? And is there something more that the industry, if I may call it this way, could do?
The straight answer to that question would be no. I'm afraid we're not doing that much of a good job. Sadly, I was in Italy in May, and I had some reality checks about that, in the sense about the distance that we have in the EU bubble, about even the media of the EU bubble. I mean, if we think about these days, we're all entertaining ourselves with the top jobs, with gossips, with rumors about who is going to be the next high representative, the next president of the European Council. And we fail to explain to the citizens what is the European Council, what the European Commission is, what they do, these people. And we do also, we have partially to be blamed for that. We have to bear part of that blame, because we ourselves have been looking at our own belly bottom, looking at our own bubble in the past years, and looking to interest parts that were also in that bubble, while in a way the real world is way outside. I don't think that everything is lost. It's not a lost cause. The next 5 years are once again an opportunity to change that. Are once again an opportunity to address those topics, as Jerry was pointing out. If there is an increase in living costs, if there is inflation, moderate parties, they should admit it. I mean, those who are in government, they should admit it and not leave these topics unattended and being prey of the far right parties and their narrative. We have been probably failing for too long to understand and to connect with the citizens, despite the efforts that we have been doing also with the newest communication tools. I mean, the institutions, they have offices everywhere in the capitals of Europe. We failed to simplify the language. We were too afraid that simplifying meant being too simplistic and therefore being negative. But that's what we failed to do. We failed to simplify the language of the European institutions, to make them easily understandable by citizens. And that ground has been taken in a negative way, but has been taken by the populist anti-European parties, that they did manage to keep and take the European Union and its institutions closer to the citizens, but in a totally negative way. So we need to work on reversing that frame, reversing that conversation, but we can do it if also ourselves we are a bit more open to get outside of this bubble. I was a month ago. I was in Sicily. There is a community. There is a commune that of people that they don't get drinkable water and water, tap water in their homes for more than 20 days. Well, where is Europe there? And they even don't know if Europe is responsible for that, or there are European policies responsible for that. So they talk to their local representatives, and of course those who are in the position, they blame Europe for that, but there is no process of communicating and of understanding that Europe is not just responsible for everything when things go wrong, and then the credit goes to national states when things go well. Europe is way too complex. I think that communication can play its role, but the structure itself of the institution hasn't improved, hasn't changed in the last few decades. I mean, since the treaties of Lisbon, since 2009, we have been going through economic crisis, Brexit, COVID, war in Ukraine, and we still have the same treaties of 2009, which is a year ago. Things have to change to be adapted to the new course. And us as communication, as campaign professionals, we can do our role, getting a bit more outside of the bubble, but it's really a common effort that has to be tackled also on the institutional level if we really want to do a step forward in that direction.
Thank you, Matteo. One thing that obviously is a big topic in Brussels is the debate around the EU top jobs. But I have the impression, I'm under the impression that this was not a top issue in the national campaigns. And maybe I would like to start with Stanisław, asking how big was the issue of who's going to get the top jobs in the campaign in Poland? Was this a topic at all?
Only in the political nerds, you know. These are the only people who care. So, well, Prime Minister Tusk did mention a few times that it should be either to do with defense, enlargement, and energy, the key portfolios. This was nowhere near the topic of the campaign. And I think, as we said, when people hear about getting these top jobs, voters don't really like hearing about these things. When they hear important job, top position, this doesn't convince them. So I think the topic is being purposefully, tucked away. After the election, however, that the fact that Poland is going to play a bigger role in EU institutions is being used, and I think quite effectively, by this government to maintain the momentum that they gained by winning the election. But during the campaign, it was only the few thousand people in Warsaw who work in politics and around that were talking about Radosław Sikorski probably taking, if there is a new defense portfolio, then fighting for that, or expansion, or fighting for the energy package, but behind closed doors and only interesting to nerds.
Jerry, do you have similar observations?
Well, I think in Greece the debate was slightly different because there was a lot of rumor about the Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis potentially, being a candidate for the top job at the Commission, which he had to several times explain that he's not interested and he's a negotiator for Ursula von der Leyen. So ultimately, that was in the press. As a rumor, it was a big rumor in the political and journalistic circles, but I don't think it was really of concern to the real voters, the real people, as you like to say. What was actually part of the campaign, especially the government party's campaign, was the notion that give us more power to be stronger in Europe, so to negotiate for you in Europe. From a stronger position, and that's as far as it came.
Daniela, how did it? I would expect that at least in Germany it was an important issue.
Yeah, I think, thanks to von der Leyen being Commission President, I think people in Germany also understand the Commission a little bit better, or at least know about its existence and that it's an executive body. I think, von der Leyen, I think, is much more sure to keep her job now. I think we all know Macron might have resisted another von der Leyen reappointment. Well, I think Macron now has bigger issues on his plate. So Macron's veto, if there was ever going to be one, is probably lifted. I think as far as how policy will be impacted in the next mandate, I think we're going to see a clear uphill battle in the next 5 years when it comes to climate policy. The Green Deal is almost like a also empty shell at this point. There has been a lot of backtracking or slow walking on a number of climate and environment reforms. So that's just going to be an uphill battle with a more far right, or with the far right having a more tip on the scales there. It's also going to be interesting how quickly or slowly even EU enlargement is going to look like in the next 5 years, because the past 2 years, things have moved at super speed compared to what we've seen over the last even decade. Several new candidate countries, including, of course, Ukraine and Moldova, but some countries in the Western Balkans have moved up the ladder in EU accession talks. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how the new commission and the parliament is going to position itself on EU enlargement, how quickly or slowly this is going to go. And for me personally too, I work on democracy issues, of course. So I'm going to be curious to see what happens with the democracy and demography file that right now it's Dubravka Šuica from Croatia is leading. I think she's might be there to stay in her role. Last gossip I heard. Values and transparency that also deals with like citizens' rights. That was led by Vera Jourova, and she already announced months ago she's stepping down. So that's going to be a new appointment. And yeah, the Commission has put a lot of time and resources the last 5 years after the conference on the future of Europe into the European citizens panels. I mean, it's really been a historic, I think, last 5 years when it comes to European democracy, deliberation, debate. The last 5 years we haven't seen that kind of developments in a while. So yeah, again, it's going to be interesting to see how this is either maintained or slowed down.
Thank you, Daniela. And before we go over to a very short round of final thoughts, I would like to give the voice to Matteo and ask him about the possible impact, because regardless of what has been said or not about the EU top jobs in the national campaigns, the debate has been going on in the Brussels bubble for months. And my question to Matteo is, how do you think that that debate that is ongoing impacts policy in the next mandate?
It's going to have a huge impact depending on who is going to lead. Mostly the Commission. It's not just about political parties, but it's just about personalities. I mean, obviously, Ursula von der Leyen is someone who's been already there for 5 years, and for the good and the worse, people know it. At the same time, and a prime minister, Jerry mentioned before, it was rumored Mitsotakis is definitely quite a different experience. I mean, a prime minister de facto has been taking part to European Council, so has also a different perspective of how things had to be run. So in the case that von der Leyen would not be the next president of the Commission, it would be someone else with a different experience. That's gonna have a huge impact on the relationship between the Council and the Commission, and therefore how policies can be speeding up, slowed down, can be changed, or what can be prioritized or not. So it's going to have a huge impact. The same applies to what is going to come next, which is the appointment of commissioners and the division of portfolios. We know that there are several criteria, of course, the size of the countries, but also the geographical representation, east and west, north and south. I do think, coming from Italy, and here a link to what has been said before, that the debate around the top jobs in national campaigns, and especially in Italy, was about the role that Giorgia Meloni can play. Probably it's the first time that Italy, as the third biggest country, came out of the European elections with the government party strong compared to the other two countries, Germany and France, that they are in what can be said a political crisis. I mean, Macron called for snap elections, Scholz has definitely lost the election. So could be the once in a lifetime opportunity for Meloni to claim her power share in the Commission. It depends what a lot of what she wants to achieve. If she wants to break the current majority and go full in for her own asks, or accept von der Leyen and rather negotiate a powerful portfolio for the Commission. But that's definitely the first time that one of the three biggest countries has come out strong with a far-right government. Of course, there are also center-right coalition partners in this government, while the other two countries are scrambling and living a political crisis. I know we're all entertained by this debate here in Brussels in the bubble. I know we are going to be entertaining ourselves until December at least. But I do think that people back in the 27 countries, they will still look at their prime ministers, they will still look at the head of states and presidents, and still want to have solutions for inflation, so for the cost of life, for migration, and for the other problems. So on the other end, there is also the urgency, probably from at the European level, to close these EU top jobs negotiations as soon as possible, to go back to business and to show that Europe is ready to go back to business as soon as possible.
Matteo, thank you for highlighting especially how multi-layered those negotiations are. This gives me hope that the next EU bubble webinar that is planned on this very topic will be also very interesting and dynamic one. But before we start planning new events, we have to summarize our today's discussion, which was very interesting, and I'm sure that our viewers will have many interesting takeaways or thought-provoking moments to listen to. So thank you everyone for this discussion. But before we finish, I would like to ask each of you to share some final thoughts or key takeaways, or maybe questions that were unanswered, if you see such. Maybe we could start with Daniela.
Yeah, I mean, my final thoughts is a little bit how I started. Is just we really can't look at and see voting groups as a monolith. I mentioned already that many of us in Germany were surprised that 16-year-olds who were given the right to vote for the first time in Germany just as equally voted for the conservatives as they did for the far right. That's a different story completely than what happened 5 years ago, and how the youth vote at that time, also 18, really pushed the German Greens to their highest success. And we also see where the far right AfD in Germany performed best was in Eastern Germany, economically less developed as well. In Cologne, too, in the city, I mean, the only two neighborhoods where they receive the most votes are the two neighborhoods in Cologne that are the most impoverished as well. And in fact, they are neighborhoods where there are also more immigrants. So we need to also stop seeing far right voters as a monolith. They can be young people, they can be people from migrational backgrounds. What we need to do, what we need to improve, is our messaging. Make sure we reach all of these people and not put people into boxes. So yeah, thanks for the great chat.
Thank you, Daniela. Jerry?
Well, I would like to focus on the future as we are wrapping up. And I think when it comes to top jobs, that's becoming pretty clear now. I mean, Mitsotakis this morning gave an interview to Bloomberg, and he did say that he sees overwhelming support in the council for Ursula von der Leyen to keep on. He is one of the two negotiators of the APP together with Tusk. And I think equally so, the Secretary General of PES has said that what the socialists will push for is to have Costa in the council, and that would leave the high rep position for the liberals. So not much change is what I want to say. However, when it comes to policy making, I do think we are going to see a slight shift to more, let's say, pro-competition, pro-industry policies, especially when it comes to the Green Deal and environmental policies that have an economic impact. And that is not to say that the Green Deal will not go forward, but would be slightly altered to come, closer to Europe's current reality. And I'm closing with this. But Europe current reality for the next 5 years is that, as Mario Draghi had said, it's actually built for the world of tomorrow, and it's facing a very, very important, very, very difficult dual challenge. That of competitiveness against U.S. protectionism and Chinese protectionism, especially, and that of security, especially vis-a-vis the Kremlin. And what it needs still with is more cooperation, less fragmentation, and that is what I hope for in the next policy making cycle.
Thank you very much, Stanisław.
So I'll maybe do something that's symptomatic of Eastern nations. Usually you end on an optimistic note, well, on a pessimistic note. I think this was going to be a very challenging 5 years for the European Union, perhaps in living memory. Even though the current coalition is safe after this European election, you'll have national elections, especially France and Germany will be important. Macron only has 2.5 years to go, and then having a completely changed council to talk with that commission, will change Europe. And we didn't speak about this, but I think it's important to remember the U.S. election upcoming and the potential return of Donald Trump, how that will influence Eastern security. How that will influence U.S. support here on the ground and for Ukraine are topics that are being constantly discussed in Poland. I didn't see it a lot in the European campaigns elsewhere, but looking through that prism, we may have the most difficult set of circumstances to face the EU in perhaps ever. So prepping for that, how we're going to secure the eastern flank of NATO, how the EU will take part in this if Le Pen wins in France, if the AfD rises into government in Germany. These are the questions that I think we will have to focus on after the cabinets and the commission is in place. Thank you. I think somebody froze, or I did freeze.
Chris, I think it's my turn, or well, I don't know if Chris is listening or.
I think he has a connection problem.
He's frozen.
I think
he looks frozen, right?
Chris
To you
is
as well.
frozen.
Matteo, you have to close the session.
I'll go ahead. Like Chris would have given me the floor. Well, I mean, everything has been said by all of you, and I second what you all said, and I agree with what Stanislav said as well. There are quite some challenges as well ahead. That Europe, I think that in the next months and in the next year, Europe needs to more and more find its own leaders. And in the past, we had in Angela Merkel a very recognizable leader for Europe all over the world, and I think we need to find our own leader, especially now that in France and in Germany we have weakened governments, and the president of the Commission can be the one stepping up and be the face of Europe more and more in the next year. I mean, we need to speak with one voice. We need to have a European Union that speaks more and more with one voice. What we have witnessed in the last 5 years, that the tensions between the Council and the Commission, between Michel and von der Leyen, definitely didn't help in facing global challenges, in facing the relationship vis-a-vis China, and will not help in facing relationship with Donald Trump if ever comes back to the White House. On the other end, policy professionals, communication professionals, and more, I think, will need to take a European dimension and to take into consideration more globalized world. I've seen from private sector there's definitely a growing interest in European affairs, but there is a growing interest in how the European affairs is linked with global affairs. I mean, it's in a more interconnected world, and that's going to be a challenge to see how the competitiveness that can be the focus of the next Commission can be a competitiveness on a global stage, and not just looking at our own governments and our own states, but really have a European dimension.
Thank you, Matteo. I hope you can hear me now. I'm not sure you can see me because there's something wrong with my connection, but luckily it happened in the very end of our webinar. So I would like to thank everyone for joining us. Daniela, Matteo, Stanisław, Jerry, and of course Adam, who was with us for most of the discussion. Thank you for your time and for all the contributions. This webinar will be available online for everyone who missed it to rewatch. And I invite everyone who followed us for the first time to stay connected with the EU Bubble Insider on LinkedIn, Twitter, to get notified about future events like this or other content that gives you an insider look into the Brussels bubble and the political European industry. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you to our audience.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everybody.